Hey everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the IEP with Dr. D. Today we're digging into a topic that is constantly coming up in schools, and it often causes confusion, very strong opinions, and a lot of debate, and that is accommodations versus modification. Now, if you're a pre-service teacher, you may be wondering, well, what's the real difference? If you're a current classroom teacher or administrator, you may be thinking, how do I make sure these are being implemented correctly and fairly? And if you're a parent, you may be asking, is my child being supported or held to a different expectation? So today we're going to break this down in a clear, practical way. We're going to talk about what accommodations are, what modifications are, how they're designed, how they're documented, and yes, we're going to tackle the ongoing debate about fairness head on. So let's start with the foundation. What are accommodations? Accommodations are changes to how a student learns or demonstrates their learning without changing the learning expectation. The key idea here is access. Accommodations remove barriers so a student can show what they know on the same standard as their peers. The content stays the same. The learning goal stays the same. And the expectations stay the same. What changes is the method. Some common examples of accommodations include extended time on tests or assignments, preferential seating, a small quiet group or quiet testing environment, audiobooks or text-to-speech, speech-to-text for written responses, visual supports or graphic organizers, frequent breaks, or chunked instruction. For example, imagine a student who understands grade-level science content but struggles with reading fluency. Providing an audiobook or having test questions read aloud doesn't lower the rigor. It simply removes the reading barriers so that student can access the content. Accommodations level the playing field. They don't give an advantage. They give access. So on the flip side, what are modifications? Modifications do change what a student is expected to learn. This is where the confusion often starts. With modifications, the learning expectations are altered. The student may be working on a different set of standards. Maybe they have reduced content. Maybe they have alternative curriculum goals. Some examples of modifications might include working on prerequisite skills rather than grade level standards, simplified text with reduced complexity, alternate assignments aligned to different learning goals. For instance, a student with a significant cognitive disability might be learning functional math while their peers are working on multi-step algebraic equations. That is a modification because the learning target itself is different. Modifications are not less effort. They're intentional decisions based on a student's individual learning needs. So let's talk about the distinction between accommodations versus modification. The distinctions matter because accommodations and modifications carry very different implications both academically and legally. Accommodations are commonly used with students who have IEPs, students with 504 plans, English learners, even students without formal plans when provided as a general support. Now, modifications are typically reserved for students with IEPs, students who require alternate curriculum or assessment. Using a modification when an accommodation is appropriate can unintentionally lower expectations. And failing to provide a modification when it's needed can deny a student meaningful access to learning. So how are these accommodations and modifications devised? Well, it's not a guessing game, and it's not based on convenience. Accommodations and modifications should be data-driven and collaborative. Here's me with the word data again. So these are typically devised through formal evaluation, ongoing classroom observations, progress monitoring data, input from teachers, specialists, families, and when appropriate, the student themselves. For students with IEPs, these decisions are made by the IEP team. For students with 504 plans, the 504 committee determines the appropriate supports. And here's an important point for pre-service and in-service teachers. Accommodations and modifications are not one size fits all. I can't tell you the number of IEPs and 504 plans I've seen where the same accommodation and modification is used over and over again. What works for one student may not work for another, and what supports a student in math may not support that student in reading. So the guided question should always be, what barriers are preventing this student from learning the material they need to learn? How should accommodations and modifications be documented? Well, documentation is critical for the student, for the family, and for the school. For students with IEPs, those accommodations and modifications must clearly be listed in the IEP. They should specify when, where, and how those supports are provided. And vague language like as needed should never be used. For students with 504 plans, those accommodations should be clearly outlined and consistently implemented. And in the classroom, documentation must also include lesson plans noting the accommodations, teacher logs or checklist, progress monitoring notes, communication logs with families and support staff. And why does this matter? Because accommodations and modifications that are written but not implemented, or they're implemented inconsistently, can lead to student frustration, parent complaints, and legal issues for schools. Documentation protects students and educators. Now, let's get to this fairness debate that I hear all the time. Is this an unfair advantage? So let's talk about that question that always comes up. Is it fair that some students get accommodations? This concern is common, especially among students, parents, and even educators. And here's the truth. Fair is not the same as equal. Equality is giving every student the same thing. Equity is giving every student what they need to succeed. A student who uses a wheelchair isn't getting an unfair advantage by using a ramp. A student with dyslexia isn't cheating by using text-to-speech. A student with an anxiety disorder isn't being coddled by testing in a quieter space. Accommodations don't change the finish line. They remove the obstacles that are in the way. Now, modifications are different, so yes, they do change expectations, and that's intentional. But fairness doesn't mean pretending all students have identical learning needs. It means acknowledging the differences and responding appropriately. For administrators, this means fostering a school culture that understands equity. For teachers, it means confidently explaining supports to students and their families. And for parents, it means understanding that supports are about access, not advantage. So accommodations and modifications are not shortcuts. They are tools. And when these tools are used thoughtfully, they empower students to learn and to grow and to succeed. Now, as educators and families, it's our responsibility to make sure that the learning is not harder or easier, but it's accessible, meaningful, and fair. If you take one thing from today's episode, let it be this. Support doesn't lower standards. Barriers do. Thanks for listening. And always, keep advocating, keep learning, and keep students at the center of every decision. If you like my content, please, please, please like and subscribe to this channel.